All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our event tonight, Libraries Night Out with authors Grady Hendrix and Chuck Wendig. My name is Erica Melnichuk, and I'm with Penguin Random House Library Marketing. And I have just a couple of housekeeping items to touch upon before we turn things over to our amazing speakers this evening. If you want to submit questions to the authors, you can do so by utilizing the Q&A box, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. You can also activate the Zoom chat, which should also be at the bottom of your screen, and comment right along with the conversation if you want. We'd love to hear from you. It's my pleasure to take a moment here with all of you to thank the many libraries across the country who partnered with us to promote tonight's event throughout their communities. We at Penguin Random House deeply appreciate their support of our books and authors, as well as their tireless support of readers everywhere. Throughout these trying times, libraries have remained a steadfast source of materials and resources, comfort and community for us all. So again, a huge round of virtual applause for the hard work and dedication of libraries as they continue to place the most wonderful books into the hands of their readers. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn over the event this evening to our moderator for tonight's conversation. Tricia Narwini is the editor-in-chief of Del Rey, an imprint of Penguin Random House, and she is going to kick off our evening. Thanks, everybody.
Hi there. We are so excited to be here. Just let me thank you all again for being here and for all that you do. Libraries are such magical wonderlands, and librarians are powerful wizards, and we stand in awe of all that you do with the literary community. So I'm going to introduce our guest of honor, who are two of horror's greatest luminaries. Get us rolling with a few burning questions. And then once we really get cooking, we'll get some questions from you, our esteemed audience. So please feel free to drop those questions into the Q&A section below. In the meantime, please welcome to the stage our guests. First, we have Grady Hendrix. Grady is the New York Times bestselling author of Horror Store, My Best Friend's Exorcism, We Sold Our Souls, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and the Final Girl Support Group. Grady also authored the Bram Stoker award-winning nonfiction book, Paperbacks from Hell, a history of the horror paperback boom of the 70s and 80s. And you should read them all because they're all amazing. Chuck Wendig is the New York Times bestselling author of Wanderers, Star Wars Aftermath, the Miriam Black thrillers, the Atlanta Burns books, and Zeros and Invasive, alongside other works across comics, games, film, and more. You should also read all of them, and I'm not just saying that because I'm his editor. He's also known for his popular blog, Terrible Minds, and books about writing, such as Damn Fine Story. Now, both of you have written these big, glorious feasts of novels, but before we dig in, I'd like to start us out with just this little amuse-bouche of a question. What is your favorite word and why?
Chuck, go for it,
Chuck,
man.
go for it. Yeah.
I'm thinking now it's a amuse-bouche. Now I want an amuse-bouche.
It's really fun to say and eat.
It's so fun. It's fun. It's good food. I've always been partial. It's not a horror word, but sesquipedalian is a fun word because it's a very long word that means very long word, and that's pretty great.
That's awesome. Yeah, mine is canceled. Not so much for the word itself, but just for what it means. Not for people, but like events. I love when events get canceled, flights get canceled. There's nothing I've ever been doing that's more exciting than if it gets canceled. It's like a snow day, it's like you're going to see a movie or a show and it's canceled and you're like, yes, I can run around and kick things over and set them on fire. I'm off the tracks, off the rails.
It's like a dopamine rush. You like get this
exactly
of joy.
You're like, I'm off schedule. Yes.
So you've written lots of words, not just sesquipedalian and canceled, but what first sparked the idea for your latest book? Was it an image? Was it a character? Was it something else? And we can start with Grady this time.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really lame, actually. Final Girl Support Group was a title. My Best Friend's Exorcism and Final Girl Support Group were both titles before I had any idea what they were about. But I think the first draft was 2014, which is a really long time. It's a stupid long time. but I'd actually started thinking about it in 1981 because I wasn't allowed to see R-rated movies. And so I didn't want people to think I wasn't allowed to see R-rated movies. So I'd like read the comic book adaptation or the Mad Magazine parody and like pretend I'd seen them. And that wasn't a great tactic. And then I realized that I could, when our Scoutmaster after Cub Scout meetings took us out for snacks at the gas station next to the church where we met, I could tell him I could use my snack money to buy magazines because reading is good. And so the first and last magazine he let me buy, because he realized that this was a terrible strategy on his part, he'd been had, was Fangoria number 12. I think it was like April 81. And they had a big story on Friday the 13th, part 2. Spoiler alert for a movie that's like 200 years old. But the beginning of that movie has the final girl, Alice Hardy from part 1, played by Adrienne King, just sort of chilling in her apartment, trying to put her life together after the trauma of part 1. And then all of a sudden Jason pops up and ice picks her to death. And it's the first time I was like, whoa, hey, that's horrible. And it was just so casually cruel and awful. But it was the first time I started thinking about these characters in movies outside the movie. Like there was clearly a gap between part 1 and part 2 where she'd had this character had this full rich life. And I was like, I really like, and I started imagining like better things, like maybe she wasn't dead, like maybe he missed her brain. And that's sort of where it really started. And actually, weirdly, after much finagling, Adrienne is the audiobook narrator for Final Girl Support Group. So full circle.
You really did bring her back to life.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Although I'm not in my Cub Scout uniform tonight. Doesn't fit anymore.
Chuck, how about you?
Yeah, I grew up in a haunted house. So and I grew up in a weird family, like one of those like sort of rough and tumble families. So I was like, what if I make those two things kiss? And there's a book there. And I just wanted to sort of, work through that, I guess, in a way, and sort of think about what living in a haunted house is like, but then keep tweaking it and see where it goes from there. It's always been a fascination for me. And then also, I live in Pennsylvania, which is an area really brined in weird folklore, like hyper local stuff that is not, one of those, like we have Gravity Hill and that's all over the place, but we also have some very hyper local folkloric things, both ghost and otherwise, that are so fascinating that I always say I'm a greedy writer. I just want to put like everything into a book. I don't want to do like 4 books with all of these ideas. I want to put all of the ideas into one book and see what happens.
Hey, can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to hijack, but dude, in your book, you're talking about the cannibal albinos of Buckingham Hill. Are those real?
It's not Buckingham Hill. I tweaked everything just a little bit to give the sort of slipstream component, but yeah, it is the albino cannibals of Haycock Mountain. There's actually, you look on YouTube, and there's an old dude. He's got like a drone YouTube channel. He goes on a walk to quote unquote find them, and it's a long video. I haven't made it all the way through yet. It's like a 40-some minute video. And it's just him, this old guy wandering through the woods looking for albino cannibals. I was like,
that seems like a terrible thing to be looking for.
Terrible. It's like, it's like Blair Witch but with an old guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like it's right there in their name. They are cannibal albinos.
Yeah.
Like
don't find them.
Yeah. Why would you want to?
Why would you want to? Bad idea.
I mean, although speaking of great titles, Cannibal Albinos, like
yeah.
Totally.
Well, in Missouri, they have this thing called the Albino Farm, which is like a local rural legend that they were telling me about when I was out there doing an event back when we did events off Zoom. And like no one's quite sure if it's a farm run by albinos or a farm that grows albinos. But everyone knows it's like bad, and it's like there's an albino farm and like people go missing and no one's sure what exactly it means. Like no one's even sure exactly the specifics of the legend anymore.
Maybe the albinos raise non-albinos for food.
That seems on brand, frankly.
That tracks.
Although I want to say though, nothing wrong with albinos. We're talking solely about cannibal albinos.
Yeah, cannibal albinos is key.
So in addition to being inspired by cannibal albinos, both of you are playing with some classic tropes from horror. So Chuck, you mentioned haunted houses, both real and assume fictional, and Grady, you were talking about the Friday the 13th films. What interested you about these like classic horror archetypes, and what were you interested in changing about them?
From my mileage, I try not to worry too much about like tropey stuff, because otherwise I'll get kind of caught up in that, and I don't want to get I don't want to bind myself up with tropey stuff. So for me, it's mostly just examining it, and then like I want to be in that space, but then keep going. Like if there are walls and there's a maze and a set definition of where it is, I want to go through the walls. I want to kick open the windows and see where else I can go. And that's sort of, with Book of Accidents, I just want to keep turning that knife and seeing where else I can take it. And in terms of all the, the ghost stuff and the non-ghost stuff, for me, it's like, it's that whole, like, turn the volume up to 11. I want to do that and see what happens.
Yeah, truly no spoilers. You take the haunted house story to places they've never been taken.
Yeah, I try not to spoil anything. Yeah, it gets weird. I'll just say that it gets weird.
Yeah.
But it gets weird because you want it to make sense. Like a lot of times with haunted houses, it's like, oh, there are these apparitions over here and there are these noises over here. So I really admired the fact that you wanted like a consistent logic to your haunting, which often they don't have logic.
Well, that's the thing about the Final Girl book, is because it's like it's taking a depth of reality, almost like a school shooter component. Like there are massacres happening, right, and there's after effects, and people need to deal with the after effects. Like you say, when the credits roll, you just expect that we've fallen off the cliff and that's the end of that story. But you're just like, no, let's keep going. These are real people with real trauma that they must kind of work through.
Yeah, well, that's always like what I really like is sort of like where things end, and like I often feel like is where they begin, really. Like at the end of The Exorcist, when like Regan and her mom are waving goodbye to like the priest,
that's it. That's the start of the story.
Yeah, I'm like, I want to know what breakfast is like now, like, hey mom, after I rubbed your face in my bloody crotch and like killed the priest, like pass the cereal. Like, like, how's that relationship gonna be? But also one thing I think is really weird is like, I feel like part of my job, or the way I think of my job, is applying like the reality principle to like horror stuff until the point where it gets ridiculous. Because if you apply the reality principle too far, it all just gets goofy. Like, you know what I mean? It all just gets dumb. So I feel like you have to do it just to the point where it starts to bend, but before it breaks. I don't know if you feel that way, Chuck.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think the art of your books is that it begins with I was talking about this the other day. Your like log lines essentially for your novels are grace and art. They're just like a sniper bullet of like, I understand exactly what this is when I turn the open the cover, but then it doesn't stop with that. You do just such a wonderful job of like I said, twisting that knife, keep kind of going with it. And I do feel like you give a level of reality, but it's also a level of seriousness to kind of an absurd concept. And I don't mean your books in particular, but horror in general is sort of an absurd thing. And that sort of level of seriousness is almost like there's kinds of jokes that are jokey and shticky. And I don't mean this in regards again to our books, but there's also jokes, there's comedy that works when it's taken very seriously. The characters don't know they're in the comedy. Right. The comedy writer does. And I think there's such a close proximity to writing comedy and horror, humor and horror, that treating both of them with a level of seriousness internally and as an author is such an interesting and useful way, at least for me, to approach that. And it's also what I like to read. It takes it seriously.
Well, it's like there's such a thin line between comedy and horror. Like even in like horror movies, like gore effects are called gags, or like scares are called gags. Yeah. It's crazy. But I never think anything I'm writing is funny. Like I always like finish and I'm like, this is like a really serious book. And then people read out like, this is so funny. And I'm like, what? Oh yeah. I
not for those people. Yeah. Not for the people in the book.
Yeah, exactly. But the log line thing is interesting because you've done screenwriting, and like that's something I really learned from screenwriting is like, books are hard because this sounds dumb, but there's a lot of words. And there comes a point for me in the middle where I'm lost. Yeah. And having a log line or like a title that doubles as a log line is like how I keep oriented. Like, oh, right, this book is about this thing. Because man, like how many words is Book of Accidents?
I think it's like 170. Maybe Trisha can confirm that, but I think
it's close to 200. It was.
Yeah, I tried to do a count and came up with like 160 or so. I mean, that's a lot. Like I've never gone much over 110, 120. Like that's. But I just finished the first draft of my book for next year. It's like 180, and I'm like, oh Jesus Christ, kill it with fire, nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. Yeah, like once a book gets like that long. I don't know how you manage it just in a basic like information thing, just to keep things consistent. It's
hard.
complicated.
Yeah, there's a lot of lost in the woods kind of a feeling writing a book that big.
Yeah. Also, I was going to say really quickly, like, do you outline or anything, or you just go?
It's weird because I used to, like when I first started writing, I couldn't finish anything unless I outlined it. The only way I understood a story was by outlining it. And then Wanderers kind of broke me of that habit a little bit. And then Book of Accidents really blew it out, though. I had nothing. I was just sort of like, that was definitely like, I see a dark forest and I'm just going to walk into it and hope I come out the other side. And then it was really a book that, and Trisha can tell this, was really made in the edit. It was one of those books that, and it wasn't that it was like a book that needed to be, we need to cut this third and do this. It wasn't a massive surgery, but it was definitely a lot of just chopping things up and moving little pieces around and rewiring pieces in it. With Trisha, again, excellent editor.
Bucky said it was like pulling out like sinew and veins.
Yeah.
It wasn't like cutting fat. It was like a phrase here and a moment here and there, and like, let's move this paragraph to 500 pages up. And like,
yeah, it was such a weird edit, and it was it was great and essential, and I learned a lot from it. But of course, what I learned from it will not help me in any other book, because that's
they're all different.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I pretend I do, and then it goes away. Like, and the more I deviate from it, the better. But I usually know the ending, and sometimes it doesn't wind up being the ending, but usually I do. And like the book I just finished, I don't know the ending, and like I've gone back to start rewriting, and I know there's like probably 8,000 to 10,000 words at the end I'm going to need to write. Okay. But until I read it through in one sitting and do it, I have no clue.
Does that terrify you, or does that excite you, or both? Or
I want to throw up just talking about it right now.
Yeah, that's fair.
But you do a thing too, like in Book of That, and you did it in Wanderers, but I feel like Wanderers was more a book with a bunch of main characters. But like you do a thing in Book of Accidents where you shift point of view, even though I feel like you've got it's pretty tight on the main characters. That terrifies me. Like I really am terrified shifting point of view like that. Is that like, I don't know. Was that like an act of bravery, or were you just like, oh, this is naturally where it goes?
I think it's naturally, because I feel like I want to, I write from the beginning to the end. So I try to take that journey that the readers are going to experience as I'm going through it. And if I start to feel like I'm getting bored or like I want to change gears, then another character gives me the chance to do that. And it's always like a different eye on the story. You know, it lets me sort of, again, like I'm a really greedy writer. I sort of want to do a lot of things in a book, and multiple POVs gives me the chance to sort of, visit a lot of angles and a lot of different spaces. Plus, you get to play with all that cool dramatic irony stuff, like one person who knows a thing and other people don't know shit about it, and then it gets extra sinister. Good times.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Just listen to both of you talk about your process all night long. I mean, I was going to ask you what you'd learned about the craft of writing from working in your latest book, but it sounds like every book kind of teaches you how to write that book almost.
Yeah, they're all, I mean, nothing I've learned from any book has helped me with another book.
No, yeah, well, I mean, God, your first book that landed was a horror store, and I read that, and that blew me away. It was such a fantastic, the terror nestled in my kid.
It's weird. Like I'm doing, actually, this is my little horror store map, because I'm doing the screenplay right now. It's going to be a feature supposedly, and I have to remember what rooms link to what rooms. But it's so weird doing the movie version, because like they want it funnier, and so like I'm like, I mean, I'll do that, no problem. But it's like, it's very, very weird. I don't know. It's very, like, I did a draft and they were like, they were fine with it, but it was very obvious they weren't thrilled.
Yeah.
And we're already like flipping through their contacts on their phone to like find the writer to take over. So now I'm doing the rewrite draft, and just like, I feel like I've got permission to do anything.
Yeah.
And I think it's better, but it's really hard to take the characters you've written, and like I feel like once I'm done with the book, they all go to college and occasionally send me a postcard. Right. Like I'm like, oh, sounds nice. And now I'm like, yeah. And now I've like kidnapped them back, and they're like, oh crap, we're in this guy's basement again.
Jesus. Has a midlife crisis. He wants it back.
Exactly. Have you ever done an adaptation of one of your books?
I have. The weird thing is that's kind of how I started. I had this book, Blackbirds, the first Miriam Black
Yeah,
book,
yeah.
and I tried writing it over the course of like 4 years, and I would get about 75% of the way through it, and it would just unspool, just and I couldn't. I was like an old person lost at the mall. I didn't know what I had gone in there for. I didn't know what I was looking for, and so I did what any aspiring novelist with difficulty would do. I entered a screenwriting competition, apparently, and
It's a process.
yeah, right, it's part of the process. So part of the prize was a mentorship with a screenwriter, in this case, a guy named Steven Susko, who does his kind of specialty was adapting pre-existing material to the screen. He did The Grudge 2, he did a Jack Ketchum adaptation. So I was like, so when I won, I don't know how the hell that happened. And then I told him, like, well, I'm not interested in writing a screenplay. I just want to write an outline for my book. I just want to figure out my book, and you're going to help me do that. So that's when I learned to outline. And sure enough, I then wrote that as a screenplay before I wrote it as a book. And then the screenplay served as this really kind of granular outline for the book. And I had done that a few other times since, where I write the screenplay first and then do the book after.
Really?
Yeah.
That is
Weird.
wild.
So weird, but it works. It really works, because like you just hit those like action dialogue.
Yeah.
It's like you can then, the book does all that stuff where it regurgitates all this big messy material into it. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, also screenwriting's so fuel efficient. It's like we're not going to have a scene of someone driving somewhere unless it really serves a purpose.
better be good. Yeah, especially if you're going to take a page count with that. Oof.
Yeah.
Grady, I'm fascinated by this map you've made of the actual horror story. Like, how often do you guys do things like that? Like draw maps or construct other kinds of documentation to help you kind of get the world straight in your head as you write?
Constantly for me.
Yeah.
I mean, like everything. I did a diary entries and stuff. Like I'm doing a book about it. So one reason I didn't, because you had asked me to blurb Chuck's book, and I didn't do it because I was in the middle of writing my book for next year that's about like a family and their house they live in being haunted. And the last thing I wanted was to read someone who I actually like their writing doing that, because then I'd just be like, oh crap, why bother? And so I apologize.
No, that's a great reason. I'll take that. Thank you. That's very good.
To get, I find families really hard, like really hard, because there's so much history. So I sat down, I have a 22,000 word document that's this family year by year, from the husband and wife meeting to when it begins. And like, I just had to sort of like do it, like just to know what's there. It may have been a waste of time, but I felt like I needed to do it. I don't know. Do you do ridiculous backstory stuff like that?
I don't. I try to find. I'm like the opposite. Because I kind of came up writing role-playing books. I saw so many authors. Write essentially like, I'm going to write this novel, and they end up writing like a story Bible that's like 400 pages long, and they never write a novel. They just stop at that story material. So I always tried to learn how to like iterate and world build as quickly as possible in the draft, and then something like that very foolish metaphor of chipping away stone and finding like the image inside of it. But I do, one thing I try to do is, if I can, is if it's somewhere different from where I am, I'll try to go to a place, because there's things that you just only capture about a place if you're there. Like even simple things like how the dirt feels on your feet is a different thing if you don't know that. It just brings a little added something. But then also with like, I did these weird sort of young adult, like corn punk novels, but I did all of these weird, like sort of like, vision boards of weird corn images and stuff I'd cut out of like decades of National Geographics of all the strange nature and capitalism going awry type stuff.
That actually to go play. I do a ton of photo reference and things.
I love that.
And one of the things I feel like, and like this to me is the poor man's version, because ultimately you want to go to the place, but like when someone gets something wrong about a location, I'm like, you don't use Google Earth? Like I use Google Earth all the time.
Google, especially right now when you can't go anywhere. It's essential to use that stuff.
Well, Grady, what you were saying about not reading Chuck's book while you're writing made me think, like, do you actually seek out certain books to read while you're working on something?
Yeah.
Or are there certain films you'll watch to inspire you or things you'll avoid?
Not so much movies. I watch really few movies these days. It's kind of
Mhm.
embarrassing. And like everyone's like, oh, have you seen this show? And I'm like, I don't know. Mad Men? Like I'm so out of touch. And I don't mean to sound like a snob because I hated those people growing up because we weren't allowed to have cable in my house. And then like my mom would relent and then she'd like cancel it again. And like we couldn't have any premium movie channels. So like I hate people like, I don't have a TV. I just don't have time. Most of what I do is reading for work.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
read a ton of stuff, a lot of nonfiction when I'm writing
Yeah,
stuff. Like
nonfiction for me too. Yeah.
yeah.
Have you read
And
anything
then
good
I'll
recently, nonfiction wise? If you don't mind.
oh yeah, well, so the book I'm doing, the family book is it's got a lot about evil puppets in it.
Ooh.
And because I also knew that your book, the wife was a sculptor.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh crap. Okay. So like another craft, like the craft thing was like overlapping, but um there's this guy named Kenneth Gross who writes about basically he writes about automatonophobia, like a fear of inanimate things that resemble humans.
Ooh.
So he writes books about statues and puppets and mannequins, and he's like this hardcore academic. But he wrote this book called On Dolls that's like the creepiest little, it's like an anthology, but it's like he's basically the editor of it, but it's like it's Freud's essay on the uncanny, whatever. But it's like this early German essay on marionette theater and like Marina Warner, who writes about fairy tales, talking about sleeping beauties and unconscious. It's just in like a short story, Old Toys, and this great Kafka thing about like this guy, and all of a sudden this little thing runs up to him in his house and it's just made out of junk, like old pencils and bits of wood and like some string, and it's like ha 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 ha, and it starts talking to him and it just sings the same song over and over again. And he's like, well, we kind of got used to having it in the house because it's sort of stupid, so it's just around. And then he's like, but then I realize after I die and my wife dies and my children die, it's still going to be here and still going to be alive. And then I get really sad. And he's like, then I find it repulsive. But yeah, so Kenneth,
Oh my God.
yeah, but Kenneth Gross, he's amazing. His stuff gets a little heady and academic, but it's really, there's so many good little twisted nuggets in it.
That's fascinating.
I mean, Chuck, you're reading some cool nonfiction along with the book you're working on right now.
Yeah, I just a book I didn't expect to be useful to. I'm writing this sequel, or, did the first draft of the sequel to Wanderers, and a book I did not expect to find as useful as I did. I didn't read it for that purpose. Anytime I see an Annalee Newitz book, I will gladly read it. And it's called Four Lost Cities, and it takes the view of these four lost sort of urban centers of the ancient world: Pompeii, Çatalhöyük, Cahokia Mounds, and Angkor. I'm mispronouncing all of those, surely. And it just sort of details how they fell and what happened to people afterward, and the diasporas that occur, and how like Angkor fell apart just basically because of infrastructure issues, just boring, sad, weird infrastructure issues that had to do with sort of like glorifying religion and making mistakes along the way in city design. And it was really useful to think about a collapsed current world through the lens of these four sort of ancient places. So it was really useful.
Awesome. I think we have some questions from the audience that we should get to. So our first comes from Jeff Bradley. I'd be interested in hearing from all three of you. What do you think the sweet spot is currently in terms of word count for a novel? Is there a target new writers should be roughly shooting for?
I used to do like freelance writing, like for magazines and newspaper. It was cultural coverage, so I hate to say journalism because it wasn't really. It was like, reviewing the special features on the Dukes of Hazzard DVD. So I'm obsessed with word count because everything used to be super. So like I try to have all my chapters hit like, and this is just me. Like I do not think this works for anyone else, but I'm saying like I'm obsessed. Like I always want my books to be like around 100, like 100, 120, like, maybe a little less. Final Girls, I think, was the 80s. I like my chapters to hit around 3,000 words, more or less. Like, I get really insane about it. And I actually, like in, I I'm not sure about Wanderers. I don't remember, but I know in Book of Accidents, you have some super short chapters in there, which I'm very jealous of. And like, because I think it really works. Like if you just cut down and have that one beat happen in like 1,000 words, I think is really effective. I run at the mouth too much to do that.
Well, Wanderers is kind of the opposite. I think the chapters there tend to run longer, 2,000-3,000 words. And I think it suits that. And that's where I have a hard time with that answer. Because I like, for me too, I'm also very obsessed with word count. Coming out of like, I got paid by the word. So I'm very like clear on, you know, how you establish rhythm with certain different, you know, word counts per chapter, per book section or whatever it's going to be. And, you know, so I'm very interested in that. But at the same time, I don't know that there's a magic word count for a book. Obviously something that's thrillery tends to be leaner, but also I've read some kind of bigger, more exciting books that sort of space that out a little bit. So I don't know. I mean, obviously epic means bigger, but you know, Wanderers is one of those books that, you know, thanks to Trisha pushing me to that, like it was just the size it was going to be. You sort of write it till it's done and then figure it out from there.
Yeah. It's weird. It's like, oh, go ahead. No, Trisha, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, list editor perspective, as Chuck alludes to, like it can vary by audience and genre, like, you know, maybe 70 to 90,000 for a thriller, but sky's the limit for an epic fantasy. But the story also takes the time that it takes. And
yeah, I was going to say, you know, it's that thing where it's like the word count should be slightly shorter than your reader's attention span. Like,
yeah, no, that's about right. That's exactly right.
And like,
I love that.
And like those stupid things, like don't write the boring parts. Like those are things that when I started writing, I was like, you know, it's like, write what you know, show, don't tell, don't write the boring parts. I was like, yeah, whatever, granddad. And now I'm like, that's the stuff. I'm like, oh, that's the stuff that matters.
It's real. It's like I found a lot of interesting lessons in writing television and writing comic books, because they have, you know, with television, especially pre-streaming, pre-cable, when everything was commercial, you had what they called the act outs. So you had your before at the start of the show, and then between every commercial break. The goal was always to hook them in a way that dragged them through the commercial break so they didn't change channels. And comic books, you're supposed to sort of at that lower right-hand corner of that page spread, you're supposed to give them a reason to turn the page. Not that I understand if people are like really in the middle of a comic book, they're like, bah, this 20-page funny book, I'm done. Like, it didn't entertain me enough. But at the same time, that's what they want you to do, is that you just sort of keep having that momentum through. And so finding a way to bring that into prose without being sort of obnoxious about it and be like, you know, really electrically needy about it. But just finding a way at the end of a chapter to sort of like convince you to get to the next chapter is one of those goals of mine.
Yeah. One of the things that blows my mind is Alan Moore, who I'm like a big fan of, like got advice from Julius Schwartz, who was like an old school DC Comics editor, like really old school. Like the dude like was born as a like 90-year-old man. But his thing, he was like the same thing. You want that bottom right hand thing for a page turn. And then he was like, and no word balloon should be more than, I think it was like 22 or 26 words. Yeah. And you shouldn't have more than, I think it was like 41 words in a panel. Yep. And if you look at Alan Moore's stuff, like even now, he adheres to that bottom right-hand panel is always a page turn, and it's no more than 26 words per word balloon. It's like amazing that like he makes the stuff he does as artfully as he does while adhering to basically these like editorial guidelines from 1955.
Yeah, really rigorous formula.
Yeah.
Next question. I really enjoyed Grady's Paperbacks from Hell and your e-newsletter, both for the bonkers plotline summaries and for the bizarre and awesome cover art. Have either of the authors been able to have any input into their covers?
Some, not a ton. Some.
Yeah, some. I mean, I feel like Del Rey in particular has been pretty interested in my input for whatever foolish reason. They want to hear what I have to say. And I've been very happy with the covers. So
I really like working with art directors, but yeah.
What's that?
I was just saying, I really like working with art directors, but also it's like, you know, they've got a workload that's not just you, and I forget that sometimes and get annoying.
I mean, Grady, you've had some great covers like that. I constantly show my art directors, like
Oh, thanks.
So cool.
Oh, that's what it is behind you. I thought it was like a really angular
Yeah.
cat that was holding really still. It's your pick.
Oh,
Yes.
and mine. Yeah, I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah, and mine. Yeah, it's I've got a good old fashioned cold pick back there.
Yeah, that was an audience question. Is that an
Yeah,
anti
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a pickaxe. Yeah, just keep it there for fun, just to
Yeah.
if the neighbors get strange about stuff.
Oh, I thought it was like a cuddling thing, like
Just,
you know,
exactly sleeping.
when you want a nap.
Yeah, exactly. It's my own version of Minecraft. I go out in the yard and I just dig for coal and gold.
So Grady, can you tell us what you are writing right now? This question is from Kristen Milks, by the way. And also any plans for Paperbacks from Hell Volume 2?
Oh man, I wanted to do a Paperbacks from Hell Volume 2 so badly. It was going to be called Paperbacks from Hell 2, Think of the Children. And it was going to be about juvenile literature from 1957 to 1997. So like S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders to the first Harry Potter book, when it was like it's bizarre to me. I think it was like there were 3,000 juvenile titles published a year up to 97. And then you get into 98, 99 with the Harry Potter effect. And it's like 20,000, 30,000, it's wild. I mean, YA just takes off, but it was weird and sleepy before that. And I would really want to do it. I don't know if logistically it's going to work. And then I'm writing the book for next year. And then I've got a nonfiction book coming out this fall called These Fists Break Bricks that I wrote with this guy, Chris Pajali, that's about Kung Fu movies coming to America. And I think it's out on September 15th, but it's wild, man. Like Chris is a great researcher. It's got a lot of art. It's basically Paperbacks for Hell for Kung Fu movies. But like we found stories like the CIA producing karate films to secretly root out communists in the Japanese film industry. And like, an 11-year-old boy who made a film that became this global blockbuster. And like, I mean, just some of the craziest stuff. It was really wild. But yeah, so that's coming out soon. And then the book for next year, which takes place during 2020. And it's a book about a family and parents and brothers and sisters and evil puppets.
I'm sold.
Yes, I need that Kung Fu book. Sounds amazing.
Oh yeah. I'm amazed we pulled it off. It was rough going.
So cool. So we have another question for Grady from Tina Lerno. I work for the Los Angeles Public Library, and you have an interview posting tomorrow on our blog.
Yes.
I have a follow-up question.
With Daryl, I think, right? Yeah.
You mentioned how there aren't many final boys. Is that something you would ever explore more?
Well, no. Like I think that there's a really iconic final boy. I think the actor's name is Mark Gatiss, but who's in Friday the 13th Part 2. I think it's Freddy's Revenge. And it's a great movie. A lot of people don't like it, and they refer to it as the gay one. And like it is a very homoerotic movie. And but it's got a final boy, and he's great. It's actually, I think, a really legitimately good movie. And it goes over the top and like gonzo, but that's what the Nightmare on Elm Street movies do. Like that's why do one that's not like that. But in terms of final boys, there's just, I feel like when there's a final girl, she stands in relation to the entire horror movie business. And you have lots of people like Alfred Hitchcock or Dario Argento, or I'm trying to think, who was the author? Maybe it was Poe, I can't remember, who are like, there's nothing more beautiful or beguiling or whatever, they each use different words, than a woman being murdered or a woman in peril. And so I feel like for Final Girl, she lives in a dialogue with that kind of attitude. And for a final boy, they don't really in the same way. So I think it just misses a little. There's nothing wrong with final boys. If there are any out there, good for you. Glad you survived. But like it just misses a little bit of spark.
Right. So one more question from Robin Ellard. What is the average amount of time from having an idea to getting something down and writing?
Ooh, that I don't think there's an answer for that. At least not for me. Like Wanders, it took me 4 years to put a story to the idea. And then Book of Accidents, I tried writing twice before, once 10 years ago and another time 20 years before. and both times in a very terrible way. They were not good books, and I'm glad no one has read those books. So boy, sometimes an idea hits you and it's like time to write, but a lot of times it takes time for those brownies to bake.
Yeah, I'm with Chuck. It's amazing to me how I think Final Girl no, there's another book after that actually. So I was going to say Final Girl Support Group was my last book that isn't an idea that I had probably a decade ago, that's just been percolating. But then I realized not the book for next year and not the one after that, but the one after that is a book I've wanted to write since like 2007 or 8. I mean, this stuff just cooks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you even talked about all the way back to 1981.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a seed there, and
a hyper ambitious 8-year-old.
Exactly. I'm going to do this one day. I'm going to write this story.
I was sitting there reading Save the Cat and like breaking the story at 9.
At 9, before it was even a book.
So we are just about out of time, but we have one more question that could serve as a good capstone to the.
Well, I have one after that, actually, if you don't mind.
Oh, great. Let's go for it.
Oh, no, I was going to say, we are so burying the lead on this entire conversation. Dude, you lived in a haunted house? You grew up in a haunted house?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My whole childhood, it was weird. But also, like, I talked about how much, like, almost like the guy with the little puppet man in the house, like how that becomes normal to you. Like, over time, the haunting becomes kind of like background noise. Like, the footsteps up and down the attic steps become a thing that if I don't hear them, I'm like, but why? Like, do you not love me anymore? Like, you just feel like I want that now. It's just part of the house. It's like a dog moving around the house. You feel like that presence. It's not always disturbing. It's disturbing at first because it's deeply unknown and strange. But yeah, a whole lot of weird stuff, including, I think I know who the ghost was, if you believe in that sort of thing. So that was a whole.
Really?
Yeah.
Was it something that your whole family agreed on and was just like, oh, well, got a ghost?
Well, that's why part of what I wanted to write the book about was like when I went to my dad about it, and inadvertently, I think, learned who I think at least the dead person was that I was talking to, he was like, acted like it was like, don't bring this to me. This is stupid. Like, he was like a manly, I always say, he's like the John Wayne type. Like, he cut off his own pinky with bolt cutters. Like, seriously, like a real story.
For a reason?
He mashed it in a log splitter, and he went to the hospital. And this is before I was born. And they told him, well, they're going to have to cut it off. And he said, how much is that going to cost? And they explained to him. So he left and went out to his truck in the parking lot where he had bolt cutters. And then he cut it off, and it left him with a stump. And then he went back in and let them do the rest. And that's what he paid for. He wanted to save on the bill because my grandmother was a super Depression era kind of lady. Anyway, so
thrifty.
When I asked him about it, he acted like it was like this kind of like namby-pamby, like, how dare you bring ghosts to, like. But then, like, later when he passed away, I talked to my mom, and she's like, oh, your dad always thought this house was haunted. He had all these experiences. And I was like, God damn it. Like, we could have talked about something. Now I feel like I have to hunt his ghost down just so we can talk about other ghosts.
Well, they're probably hanging out together.
They're probably all hanging out together. Or maybe he won't acknowledge that they're there. It's very embarrassing.
Oh my God. He just like totally like cold shoulders the other ghost.
Like, you're a ghost too, buddy.
Well, I actually wish we had like another hour just to talk about Chuck's haunted house ghost stories. But sadly, we are just about out of time. If our guests want to hear more from you, where can they find you online?
I'm at terribleminds.com, or regrettably on Twitter at Chuck Wendig, or Instagram at Chuck_Wendig.
Yep. I'm just GradyHendrix.com, and all my dumb junk, social media, everything, all in the same place. Easy to remember.
And Grady's newsletter really is a lot of fun.
It is. And I've got a new one coming out next week. I've been a little jammed up, and also like writing about these books. The last 2 books I read just weren't very good. I don't want to say anything about them.
Oh gosh. But thank you so much to our guests and to the librarians for having us tonight. It has been
Thank you.
Awesome talking.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, absolutely.
This is really cool.
Yeah, librarians, go.
Librarians, yes.
Go gadget librarians.
All right. Good night, y'all.
Good night. Thank you.